He was thought of as obstinate, arrogant, and bad-tempered. In fact, he just could not fit in at school. He certainly never got down to his work. If he had, with his gifts, he could not have failed to do well.
The teenage Adolf was now being exposed to the dominant force in Europe at that time, nationalism. 30 years before, Bismarck had welded all the duchies and kingdoms of Germany together to make a powerful German nation under Kaiser Wilhelm. In contrast, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a sprawling and decaying collection of Eastern European bits and pieces, supposedly united under the Habsburg Emperor. Each national group wanted its independence, and the old empire was clearly falling apart at the seams. Many Austrians eagerly anticipated such a breakup and were calling loudly for union with their fellow Germans in the dynamic and modern nation-state to the north. The effect of this clash of patriotic forces penetrated the school in Linz, which in any case had a reputation for its nationalist attitude.
Good fortune sent me a history teacher who used our budding nationalist fanaticism as a means of educating us. This teacher made history my favorite subject, and indeed, although he had no such intention, it was then that I became a little revolutionary. Did we not know, even as little boys, that this Austrian state had and could have no love for us Germans?
Other than history, the only subjects in which he showed any interest at school were gymnastics and freehand drawing. His ambition now was to enter the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. However, he was too late to apply in that year, 1905, and didn't bother to apply in the following year either. Instead, at 16, he lived the life of a young man about town, paying frequent visits to cafes, the theatre, and the opera, where he first met August Kubitschek. Though a year older than Hitler, Kubitschek was spellbound by him for the 3 years that their intimate friendship lasted.
Adolf was exceedingly violent and highly strung. Quite trivial things could produce in him outbursts of temper, which I thought quite out of proportion to the significance of the matter. I came to understand that our friendship endured largely because I was a patient listener. But I was not dissatisfied with this role, for it made me realize how much my friend needed me. He, too, was completely alone. His father had been dead for 2 years, and however much he loved his mother, she couldn't help him with his problems. I was often startled when he would make a speech to me, accompanied by vivid gestures, never worried by the fact that I was the only audience. These speeches, usually delivered somewhere in the open, seemed to me like a volcano erupting. The tension he felt was relieved by his holding forth on these things, as though something quite apart from him were bursting out of him. Such rapture I had so far only witnessed in the theatre, when an actor had to express some violent emotion. And at first, confronted by such eruptions, I could only stand gaping and passive, forgetting to applaud. But this was no acting or exaggeration. This was really felt, and I saw that he was in deadly earnest. Again and again I was astonished at how fluently he expressed himself, how vividly he managed to convey his feelings, how easily the words flowed from his mouth when he was totally carried away by his own emotions. It wasn't what he said that impressed me first, but how he said it. I had never imagined that a man could produce such an effect with mere words.
August Kubitschek was the first of millions to be affected in this way. Meanwhile, not yet 17, Adolf was the master of the house. He passed the time being his own tutor, reading, sketching, drawing up grand plans for the rebuilding of Linz, writing poetry, and for a few months taking piano lessons. After 2 years of this, he finally applied to the Academy in Vienna in October 1907, taking with him a portfolio of his work. He just failed the examinations, and did even worse the following year when he tried again. He returned to Linz, where his beloved mother was dying of cancer. Her eventual death left him grief-stricken. There's little detailed evidence about the next 4 years, from 1909 to 1913, but Hitler later described them as the unhappiest of his life. He slept in poor lodgings, doss houses, and sometimes doorways. Apart from his orphan's pension, he scratched a living and derived some artistic consolation from the production of watercolour postcards, which were hawked around the Viennese cafes. The Vienna that Hitler saw, that he hated all his life, would have delighted most other men. Cosmopolitan, relatively liberal, a centre for cultural expression combining a great tradition with modern experiment. All this disgusted him, as did his fellow dossers, and he kept aloof by exaggerating his Bavarian accent and playing the proud German down on his luck. These years from the age of 20 to 24 hardened him and gave him a brutal and cynical outlook on life. Virtually his entire philosophy can be traced to this first-hand experience of social problems and the political manoeuvring calculated to exploit them. Hitler's recipe was to be a careful selection of the most useful points of the Viennese political parties. Nationalism to inspire a patriotic fervour, blended with socialism to appeal to the masses, and using rallies and parades to impress the middle and ruling classes with the visible strength and momentum of the mass support. Nationalism was automatically anti-Semitic, anti-social democrat, and anti-communist, as all of these were by definition international. Thus were the foundations laid of National Socialism, a carefully worked-out formula of catch-all ideas to be all things to all men. Furthermore, Hitler saw no place for parliamentary democracy in this, particularly after he'd seen the Imperial Assembly in action.
Present were a few hundred of these popular representatives who had to take a position on a question of vital importance. The intellectual content of what these men said was on a really depressing level. A wild, gesticulating mass screamed all at once in every different key, presided over by a good-natured uncle who was striving by the sweat of his brow to revive the dignity of the house by ringing his bell and alternating gentle reproofs with grave admonitions. This invention of democracy is most intimately related to a real disgrace, the cowardice of a great part of our so-called leadership. What luck to be able to hide behind the skirts of a so-called majority in all decisions of any importance. Compare this with a truly Germanic democracy, characterized by the free election of one leader and his obligation to assume sole responsibility for his actions and omissions.
In May 1913, to escape call-up into the Austrian army, he left to settle in Munich, Bavaria. When war came the following year, he enlisted at once, but into the German army. His regiment was soon in action in France, and he was singled out for the hazardous duties of a dispatch runner. Within months, he was promoted to corporal and awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. Later, there were several more medals for bravery, culminating in the coveted Iron Cross First Class.
A shining example to those around him. His courage and exemplary bearing throughout each battle exerted a powerful influence on his comrades, and this earned him the respect of superiors and equals alike.
Hitler never let us down, and was particularly suited to the kind of task that could not be trusted to other runners.
Hitler was mentally very alert and physically fresh and hardy. His pluck was exceptional, as was the reckless courage with which he tackled dangerous situations and the hazards of battle.
Of all my men, he was the closest to me in the human sense, and I never failed to appreciate the views he expressed in our private conversations, views which testified to his profound love of his country.
In October 1918, he was gassed at Ypres and spent the last weeks of the war an invalid. Though temporarily blinded, the one lasting reminder of the gas was that his voice took on a hoarse quality that proved compelling to his later audiences. While he lay sightless in hospital, he, like the rest of the nation, was stunned by the news that the German government was to sign an armistice. What had been kept from the public was that the undefeated German armies were actually on the point of collapse. The German High Command foisted the blame onto the civilian Social Democrat government, and so the legend was born of a proud and invincible army dishonorably stabbed in the back.